Breach of Peace is being reviewed. I've sent out early copies to people and gotten early reviews back. Pips just sneezed. That was adorable. And I just want to say first, the overwhelming positivity so far has been so flattering. Thank you guys so much. I have a new wave of confidence writing the sequel. That's been awesome. And there's been some criticisms as well, which I'm really taking to heart. And there's been some criticisms as well, which I'm really taking to heart. And of course, I'm not going to respond to every bit of criticism I get, or most of it. But there's one specific discussion I've actually been waiting to have on this channel for quite some time. I've just never really felt comfortable doing it with any specific examples because it gets heavily into authorial intent. And as you guys know, I don't like to put myself in an author's place and say, here's what they meant, and you don't have a right, because I'm not the author. I don't feel comfortable doing that. But now it's happening to me. So I can talk about it because it's specifically in an instance with breach of peace. And I actually think the criticism I'm getting here is valid. So I sent an early review copy to Travis, who has his own podcast. He's involved with the r/fantasy subreddit. He's a friend of mine. I like him. We've been on each other's podcasts. He's wonderful. And he didn't necessarily love my portrayal of police within Breach of Peace. And here's what I actually want to say, which might surprise people at first. His criticism is completely valid. You're absolutely allowed to not like the fact that I'm putting you in the shoes of people who are way overpowered, deified police officers. And that's the setting of Breach of Peace. You're following cops who have so much more authority than the cops in the real world have, and abuse it. And because you're in their perspective, it's justified in their minds. And you'll hear arguments from them throughout these books that do try and say this is a good thing. And Travis didn't really like that. That's totally fair. You're allowed to not like that. But a few comments I've seen from spinning off his review have talked about how, well, it's clear Daniel believes this. It's clear Daniel wants this to be a thing. No. And this is where I want to get into this larger discussion, but let me more clearly paint the picture of what exactly people are talking about. In this book, as I said, you're following police who are overpowered, authoritative, deified within society officers in a religious cult that reigns. So yeah, there's kind of a perfect storm there for them to be just bad people in terms of their position in society. And there's obvious parallels to the real world to go from there, right? I mean, there's a lot of discussion happening with the police still right now, but I wasn't ever really trying to actually frame it to be parallels to that. I think it's inevitable people are going to draw those, as Travis did, and he has every right to. But in terms of, hey, I can actually speak on authorial intent now, there was obviously influence from the real world. But in terms of crafting this police force, I was more just focused on logically trying to think about what would the abuses of power in this world look like? And any that reflect in our world are probably just a result of similar issues and our own systematic problems in our society. To the people who are saying I'm clearly pro-cop having all this power, no again. This is me writing from the perspective of religious extremist cultists. Now, I make these characters likable in some ways because they are your protagonists, but that's the conflict I'm trying to make people feel and have. And I want to reiterate, you are absolutely allowed to not like that. This is purely me making a video responding to freedom of author writing and authorial intent, because I think it's so important. It's so crucial that authors have the freedom to write from the perspective they don't believe in and do so freely without judgment on them. I mean, we see this a lot in Grimdark, and I know Grimdark fans in general are more forgiving of this, but I've cultivated an audience of a lot of people who don't necessarily like Grimdark, because when I started this channel, I wasn't much of a fan of it, and I wouldn't necessarily classify my own book as grimdark, but hey, that's up to you to decide. But there's definitely elements in there. And the fact that there's this framing going on definitely puts this idea in your head that, hey, if Daniel doesn't like grimdark so much, is he pro what he's talking about? Is this something he agrees with? Absolutely not. And I just want to say, I am very much so for freedom of art. I think I should be able to write from perspective of any type of character and it not be a reflection of myself. Same for any author. I mean, think about it. From all the different perspectives Stephen King is written from, do we really think he believes in all of those things? Not trying to say I'm Stephen King. I'm just saying from the positions of authors, it's very unfair to try and do that to them. And I can totally see, specifically with Breach of Peace, how I probably didn't do a good enough job underlaying the malice within certain things that are being done by our main characters. I mean, not getting into spoilers, there is a scene where our main character has someone in custody, kills them purely out of anger, and because of their position in society and the failure of checks happening on police in this world, they know they're not going to be in trouble for it. They know, like, hey, cops are allowed to do this, and I'm just going to do it because I'm mad at them. I know I'm not going to get more information from them at this point, so I'm just going to murder them. I'm not pro that. Just want to reiterate. I think that's a bad thing. I also take moments to show Samuel is an officer who abuses his power in the sense that he goes out of his jurisdiction. He's someone who will go above and beyond what he's supposed to be even be limited to in the few limits of the society, but he breaks it and abuses that, and because of the problems in this world, he's not held accountable. And I did make sure to put at least one officer in here who I think people can get behind and say, okay, this is actually someone who was attracted to this position of power, but for the right reasons. Because I do think it's, there are people who want to serve their community. There are people on all sides. It's just this world isn't extreme because it's run by this certain, Orwellian society I've crafted. It's going to be more of the bad than the good. Although I still wanted to put one beacon of like, here's how someone can work within a system to try and do right, no matter how futile it might be. So yeah, there's a lot there where I absolutely think I probably should have done a bit of a better job underlying how this is wrong. I just was afraid to because I didn't want to feel heavy-handed. I didn't want to feel preachy. And unfortunately, narratively, it didn't make a ton of sense for me to have a scene where they were so overtly abusing their power to like an unarmed civilian. It just didn't fit. Especially with how the officers you're following are not the most corrupt, they're not the most abusive this society sees, so it's tricky. I just want to reiterate, in no way, shape, or form should anyone in my audience jump on someone for saying, I didn't like that element of this book. I think Travis was right, and I'm actually going to go into the sequel and rewrite some things, I think, to make the issues more overt in some ways while still trying to maintain a delicate balance of it doesn't make sense from the perspective of these characters for them to be seeing these issues in the clearest light. But it's a fascinating conversation, and it's one I'd love to see explored more in the comments, but I am very much so against the people who went on from Travis's review to say like, oh, clearly this is his beliefs. Authors don't always, say it with me, authors don't always believe in what they write, especially when it's fiction. I want to really hammer that home. Abercrombie does not believe in what Glockta says. Evan Winter probably doesn't agree with his protagonist's mentality towards revenge. It's about making worlds that are immersive. It's about not putting filters in place where it feels like the author's trying to ham in a message through thoughts that character wouldn't necessarily be having. I want to have a very real immersive experience through walking through these zealots' head. Yes, these are your protagonists in my book, but they're bad people for a lot of reasons. They're still human, they think they're right, and I did a lot of research into like your average person during 1940s Germany, how they did logical loops and backflips to try and justify themselves living in this world, and I put that in the book. Do I agree with it? No! Absolutely, no! 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 Ugh! No! I get there are people online who just hate me, and they're gonna try and, take things to the most negative extreme to paint me in the worst light possible. Please don't believe those when you see them. I'm not pro-religious zealot cops being able to murder people. Amazingly controversial statement. Anyway, guys, like and subscribe if you have not already. I hope this comes across somewhat well. I just wanted to get that out there to push back on a narrative, and hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Breach of Peace is available to pre-order in the comments down below if this interests you at all. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high-tier Patreons, including Fabian, Christina Martin, Surgery Darn, and Bandy. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.